Good evening, everyone, both here, our large crowd here, and the couple that are joined us so far. My name is John Metzler. I'm a board member on GLUNA, the Greater Lansing United Nations Association. And the Java Cafes, as many of you know, are a monthly or once every 6 weeks presentations that we give to the public, often related to sustainable development goals and other activities of the United Nations. So we're glad to have you here tonight, and we're particularly glad to welcome our speaker, Professor David Favre from the MSU Law School, formerly the Detroit Law School. David comes to us from Virginia many years ago. He's a graduate of the University of Virginia and the William and Mary Law School. He practiced law, private law, in Virginia before coming to Detroit in 1976, and he transitioned in the 1990s to MSU. The reason he's here with us tonight, though, is because he is an expert on international environmental law. He's also an expert on animal law, and I'm interested in what exactly all of that, what that means exactly. He's published widely in these areas, and so he's going to be here tonight to talk to us about international environmental issues and the regulations and why the regulations perhaps are not working the way they should be working. But David, we are delighted to have you here. We wish there was a slightly larger audience, but we're here to listen attentively to what you have to say to us. Thank you.
The kids may want to go back.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming. A few sentences about my background, so you'll know where I'm sort of coming from. My undergraduate degree was in chemistry, and so I feel very comfortable with a lot of the science that's involved in what we're going to talk about. And I've done a fair amount of traveling, and under the treaty CITES, which is a Convention for the Protection of Endangered Species, I've gone to 6 of their international meetings. And so I know what the process is, and it's the same for all the environmental treaties that are involved. And I wrote a whole book on CITES, and I've been teaching the course for 20 some years now. It's become very difficult to teach because it's so disheartening about what's happening. And I try to have my students have a positive attitude. When I teach animal law, we end up with a positive attitude about doing good things for animals. But when it comes to global warming, I don't have a positive attitude for you. But I think it'd be important to understand where we are and what the options are to understand why it's so difficult. It's going to be so difficult to move ahead. And there's a lot of very positive voices out there still, and I don't seek to dismiss them. But as some of you might know, as you get older, you get a little less positive because the realities of the world seem to seep in, and you've learned a few lessons over time. And that's sort of, I guess, where I am. This is my last year at the law school after 49 years of teaching law. So I'm happy to be part of this. What is the problem? Let's start with a little science. When I teach about global warming in my law class, it takes me 12 hours to do it. There's so much that you can bring in to talk about. And so I'm not going to go fast to try to get through 12 hours worth of material. That's obviously not going to work. And please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions as I go if you don't understand something. Okay, I'd be happy to explain what I'm talking about in more detail or another way. Do we have global warming? As you know, there's several people on the national level that don't seem to think global warming is a particular problem or anything. But this, I think, is one of the most interesting charts that belies all the arguments about the fact, oh, it's just normal changes and stuff. It's not. This goes back 400,000 years. And it shows what the CO2 level has been for all that time. And then over at the end, it goes, phew, and that's the last 50 years here. And that's why it looks like a straight line up, because it's a 400,000 year chart. That's called a hockey stick graph that shows it. And I'll show you in just a second, there's no sign of it doing anything but continuing to go straight up. It's not, the arrow's not working.
By the page down.
Okay. Oh, okay,
Page down, page.
okay. This is one of the charts I always use because it is absolutely number-based, hard number-based. It's a measurement that's been taken on the island of Maui in Hawaii since 1960, every day. And when they chart that, you see that the up and down is the annual cycle that they measure CO2 under. Remember, it would be having the winds coming from the Pacific over the islands. And apparently it's picking up a global change as each year goes through the rotation, and industrial pollution gets into the atmosphere in different times in different ways. And I want to point out to you that in 1992, which is right here, that's when the treaty was signed. And you can see how much change it's made since that time. None, zippo. In fact, if you know how to read charts, you will note that the right side of the chart is steeper than the others, which means it's increasing, not decreasing. So there's not even, let alone staying the same, it's increasingly going up. Now that's CO2, that's not temperature, but the chemistry between the amount of CO2 and the temperature is very basic science. That this is not something anybody can argue about. And this is the next chart is the actual global temperature. Now, we just have to sort of accept that this is good science, because you can imagine thousands of numbers go into producing the one number of what's a global temperature. There's no place you can measure the global temperature at. You have to average a whole bunch of things around the world. And I think that what they've done is at least been consistent in how they do that, so that even if the absolute number is not right, the direction of the numbers are correct. And you see that in 1980, it starts to turn up, and use your eye to find 1992. And again, we see the chart moving up. Now, this is increases from the average of 1850 to 1900 is the 0 point. And this is showing how much the temperature increases. Okay, that's on the right-hand vertical. And you might remember the temperature 1.5 as being something a lot of people talk about, and 2.0 are the two big numbers. And last year it was measured above 1.5. So we're already at that threshold that was considered an important goal in the Paris Accord. I'll get to that.
When we talk about an increase of 1.5 centigrade, right?
Yes, ma'am.
It's 1.5 degrees above.
A base.
When was the base?
The base is the average between 1850 and 1900. So it tries to go back to a baseline that was sort of pre-industrial. That's considered the pre-industrial baseline. Now, it does vary from year to year, but again, you can see it seems to be increasing more in the more recent ones. And I have no reason to think, from what I've seen about other numbers, that this year it won't be at least at the same point, just above 1.5. Yeah.
1.5.
About 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, the world has moved beyond our weight and measure system. And so, yeah, you're right, that newspapers could convert it, but then that might cause confusion because they'll see 1.5. We've decided to use that. And let me suggest to you that is one of the biggest problems, is that people just can't get excited. It went up 1.5 degrees. Who cares, right? It moves 20 degrees in one day. How can this be of any consequence? But it's a lot of consequence, and that a lot of people just can't, and I understand it, can't get really excited about such a small number move. But when you talk about the entire Earth and how much energy it takes to create the heat that it would take to raise that, then it's a stunning number. It's a number with 8 zeros on it. So maybe we should use that more often than this. This is showing where we are and where we need to be going and where it doesn't look like we're going. This is the black represents the existing emissions, okay, up to 2024, I think it is. And then the dotted line is, if we don't take major corrections, that's where it's going to go. And if we're going to keep it at 1.5, we have to bring that emission down to there. Even at 2.0, it needs to come down to there. And right there's the reason why I get very discouraged. There's no reason to think it's going to happen. Okay, I mean, this line has been going that way for 30 years. And so what's going to turn it around next year? Not very much, I think. Now, where's it coming from? Who's responsible for this, right? Well, there's 3 different ways to look at this, and that is historic total emissions, per capita emissions, and present emissions compared to other countries, okay? If you do the historical analysis, you have to take a look at the United States. Look, we were the big guys all this time, way up here. Here we're decreasing some, but still the biggest. Historically, we have the most responsibility. United States, clearly. China will soon overtake us. So responsibility, well, another small science point, but also very important, is why it's fair to talk about cumulative emissions is that CO2 stays in the atmosphere on average 100 years. So everything 30 years ago that was emitted, most of it's still in the atmosphere that we put in there. So that's why morally and ethically, I think obviously anybody looking at this is going to say, well, we have some level of responsibility. I mean, we did start this, and China's the second also by itself.
Besides CO2, how critical or important are methane and nitro oxide and the forever chemicals, the fluorinated ones?
Right.
My understanding is methane is about 28 times as strong holding heat, but it doesn't last.
Right,
so long.
that is correct. I was going to get to that, but you're absolutely right. This is just CO2, but we need to be aware of methane. The other ones play a part, but it's not worth really spending any time on. But methane is an important second one because it's so much more potent when it's up there, but it doesn't last as long. But it's still there 20, 25 years. Okay, now, Oceania. Does that surprise you? Oceania. Why is that up there? That's Indonesia. We don't think much about Indonesia in the United States. It's a pretty low-profile country. It has a huge population. It's expected to explode in population. Its birth rate is amazingly still high. And it's dealing with industrial processes. It also includes Vietnam, which has now become a secondary industrial state after everybody moved out of China. And so we don't see much change happening there. So that's a new hotspot. And understand that one of the things that's happening is the balancing of increasing your GDP, your industrial output, for increasing the living standard for the people in your country versus keeping down the CO2 and emissions. So we know that for industrialization to occur, you need energy. You need a lot of energy to drive the manufacturing process. And you need the manufacturing process to increase the standard of living in most places. China is the classic example of this. They made the decision in the 90s to become an industrialized nation. And back then they actually turned loose capitalism a bit to make things happen. And all of a sudden the need for energy just went off the roof. And they're still trying to work through how to do that. But they were 2 years ago, they were still opening a coal plant every week. And so that was, at the same time, they're producing more solar panels than the rest of the world combined. I mean, they're doing one and their need for energy is so high on a growth basis that it's causing the rest of the problem. Now, the other thing to see is India there all by itself. And why is India there? It just passed China in total population. And therefore, there's the risk that if they ever decide to reindustrialize or become more effective industrialized, they do have some, then the energy needs of India is going to cause problems as well. Africa is not that big of a problem. Notice that the United States and Europe have decreased since the treaty was signed. Okay, in the United States, that's primarily because we stopped using coal. We slowly gave up using coal, which has health problems, all kinds of other problems than just CO2. Getting rid of coal is a really good idea from at least 6 different points of view. What happened? Well, United Nations, in its vast wisdom and glory, about 1990, decided we needed a treaty on global warming. And we also needed a treaty on sustainable development. And we needed a treaty on forestry. And we needed a new declaration. 4 major projects were to come together in Brazil in 1992. It also would be the first time that country leaders, the actual presidents of countries, would come together on an umbrella of talking about helping the environment. It was pretty clearly the high point, the high watermark of goodwill and good feelings, and the idea of we can do this, we just need to make things happen. You're going to see a small pattern here for the United States. Every time a Republican is in office for the presidency, we disclaim any interest and responsibility in global warming. Then the Democrat comes in and takes it back up again. And then a Republican comes in. We seem to flip-flop a lot, you noticed. So at Rio, Bush 1 disclaimed an interest in signing anything, and he insulted everybody by not going himself. He sent his underlings to go to the conference where presidents from other countries were there. He didn't want to be put in awkward situations. He sent Al Gore to do that, poor Al. And then Kyoto was 5 years later, a protocol under the treaty. They were going to do a protocol in 5 years to tighten it up and provide more specifics about what it was. Rio set a framework for thinking about how to proceed, and it created an index of developed countries, and each country was to say how much they promised to reduce their emissions by some indefinite date. And we were supposed to reduce our emissions so it was only 90% of what it had been. Now, understand, in 1992, the US and some of the EU countries, the only countries in the world that actually measured what they were putting out there because of our Clean Air Act, we actually knew how much we were doing within a fair range. Most countries had no idea what they were actually putting in the air. So that was sort of ground zero for factual scientific information. And the Kyoto Protocol put in more specific numbers. Then Bush Jr. got in and rejected that. He didn't withdraw from the treaty, he just said, we're not going to do that. Copenhagen, Obama was part of two important ones. The Copenhagen meeting was a total disaster. The group could not come to an agreement to anything, even though all the leaders were there, except that the leader of China refused to actually be part of the negotiations. But if you read what Obama did, he was audacious. Let me tell you, he was swinging his bat. But he was a major problem in that he told all the rest of the countries, we can't call this a treaty. Because if we call it a treaty, then I have to take it to the Senate. And it's quite clear they're never going to approve this. 2/3 vote in the Senate for, the last time we did an environmental treaty was 40 years ago. For some reason, our senators do not believe we have international obligations. That's another whole long story. So in Paris, it's now called an agreement. And he thought he could keep it under his umbrella. As a president, he can carry out international agreements. It's not a treaty, so he could do that, which was all good, except of course, then Trump came. And within 1 month, he signed the declaration saying, we're withdrawing from the treaty. The treaty allows any country to withdraw with 1 year's notice. Okay, that's pretty standard for treaties. You can't force a country to stay in a treaty, right? All joining of a treaty is voluntary. Every country that joins has to individually ratify it within their own political system. We have to go to the Senate. Other countries, the president has the power to do it himself. And there's all sorts of things in different, we don't care what it is, but you just have to go through your internal political process to accept the treaty. So he rejected it. Then our next president, of course, reestablished it, rejoined it, and then Trump came back and rejected it again. Only this time he did it with a kick to the boot. He not only he withdrew from a number of environmental initiatives, he pulled money from all sorts of things, and has decided not only to not be a leader on this, but to be a counterpoint leader. He is now asking countries to buy our energy so we can increase our energy production. He just, in the last 2 weeks, the Secretary of Interior noticed that 100 million, I think that number's so big, I think it was 100, maybe it was just 10 million. 10 million public land acres are now going to be available for coal mining. I mean, even if you don't want to do the treaty, he is hung up on coal mining as something that we need to do as a country to get our industrial vigor back. And it's a really bad idea. Okay. And we use, in the past 10 years, methane has become the key backup energy because we have the solar and the wind, but those are not available 24 hours a day. So you do have to have something that's not solar and wind as part of your energy production process. But methane in and of itself is its own problem, let alone the CO2 that comes out when you actually burn it. Methane's a problem because from where you drill it through and you put it through the pipes, the leaks in that whole part of the process is methane. And so there's some, just because you're using it's better than coal, everybody agrees to that, but that doesn't mean it's still not causing a problem with CO2. This is statements of the numbers by country more specifically, just to show you. And here we can see China is #1 at almost 30% of the global emissions comes from China. So down here, Thailand, 0.8. You get 150 countries that have under 1%, and then China's got 30. Then we're next with 11. Yeah.
We can't see the headings on the numbers.
I can't change that. No, it's up there. I mean, yeah, China at the top line.
No, but we can't, so the 2,142,000 under China,
Yeah.
what does that represent?
That a title over the country.
Oh, you can't see the heading of the columns. Sorry. I have a hard copy. I don't mislead you. So the last column is the percent change since 1990. And then the second column is the percent of the world emissions. So the 29 up there is, they are putting out 29% of the whole world's total emissions. And then we're at 11, India's at 7, Russia's at 4, Brazil 2, Indonesia 2.3. So that's where Indonesia is slipping up there.
US really decreased emissions by 97.6%.
That does sound weird, doesn't it? No, they've not, I don't know, that's not the right, what that number means then, because no, they've not done that. They have decreased it. I don't know why that'd be. Sorry, I can't tell you why that's there. But what I want to do here is bring up why I think it's particularly frustrating, and that is, in my experience, authoritarian regimes don't care about the environment, period. I've told my students year after year, if you want good environmental outcomes, you have to have a democracy, a functional democracy, because it's the people that care about the environment. Politicians don't care that much, but if the people say, I'm not going to vote for it if you don't do something, they do listen to that in a real functioning democracy. So where do we have functioning democracies at this point in time? Not in the top 5. So almost 40 or 50% of the emissions in the world are now under authoritarian regimes. What moves authoritarian regimes? Well, shame, embarrassment, and money. Okay. And money usually goes the other way when it comes to the environment, right? Till about 5 years ago, it was an international consensus that this was a real problem and we need to do something about it. And the European Union was perhaps forefront in this position on a global basis. They really did, and they put up money to make it happen. Contributions have been made. They provide leadership. They provide all sorts of support for trying to make this happen. They're always bargaining inside the regime for the highest and best position. Okay, they get all the cudgels for that. I was just talking to a professor from the Netherlands 2 weeks ago. She came to Ann Arbor to do something, and I've known her for years and went down and had dinner with her. And she said she was very discouraged because the Ukrainian war and the threat of what that is now doing is now taking global warming off the agenda of a lot of the European countries. They have something new to worry about, and they do. No, absolutely. But so, how much energy does a country have and how do they spend it? They're not unlike us. But one of the things I try to show is that countries are simply, they act like human beings because they're made of human beings. Now, the human being they most act like is usually the political leader in the international regime. Okay, so what do you see there? And we see Germany's backed off, France has just collapsed. Where's the good news? Britain collapsed a little while ago. So looking to Europe as for leadership at this point in time does not seem auspicious. That's a fairly recent development. I don't know what's going to turn that around. And at the other side of the spectrum, China has picked up and is seeking to be the international leader in global warming issues, believe it or not. Okay, they're trying to be the good guy. And they're doing that in fair part because of production of alternative energy. They have the right to claim we're producing more alternative energy than anybody else. And oh, by the way, we got a couple million things over here. If you want to buy a few, we can send it to you. So, and you need to think about this on not just the environmental scale, but on the geopolitical scale. They are seeking to become partners with all the other countries and saying, we're going to help you. And this is one of their entrees to other countries now is, let's sign a deal where you can get hold of our alternative energy hardware and put it into your system, and then you can feel good about what you're doing. And the US is backing off and saying, oh, that's a joke, don't anybody do that. And of course, no money's going to any other country to help them do it. We're not even doing it here. So we've given up the leadership position that we would try to get occasionally. And the fact that we're only 5 months into his presidency just sort of gives me the shakes. I don't know where we're gonna be in another 3 years.
Yeah.
It's a little frightening. So think about authoritarian regimes. Think about that leader. To my knowledge, they're all men, right? Apparently men with very large egos. And what do they care about? The accumulation of power, political power and monetary power. And they'll do whatever it takes to do that. And the more ruthless they become, the more effective they are in being authoritarian leaders. So if you've got to kill a few people, well, you know, that's the way it goes. I feel better. And it's just, does Trump or now anybody in the administration care about Pakistan? I don't think so. Yet they may be one of the countries most at risk of losing many, many people. A year ago, they had a flood that wiped out almost a fifth of the country. And they've not recovered yet. And many fields were lost, and people were killed, and communities were literally wiped out. Not unlike we've seen here in North Carolina, where the flood comes through and literally takes a town away, where they lost communities as well. So do we have any obligation to Pakistan? Remember, we started this, and we're still a major part of why they're having these negative impacts out of what global warming is already doing. Another science point is there's what's called tipping points. And that is, there may become points, and I think it's going to come, where what we do is no longer relevant because there's so much global warming has occurred. Now nature takes over and does something. Melting of glaciers. At some point, the European glaciers are going to go away. The glaciers in the Himalayas that give water to India are going to go away. And what do? Well, that's going to be one of the consequences, immigration and war. If you don't have water, you're going to go someplace that does. And we will face that in the United States as well. We're going to face internal disposition of people. It won't be illegal immigration, but there's going to be movement. Do you really want to buy something in Phoenix? I think in 10 or 15 years, Phoenix is going to become uninhabitable. How about Miami Beach? Already starting to turn. The condo market's going down because they don't have enough fresh water and the sea is rising. And so, you know, we're going to have consequences within the United States. So I also tell my students, the best option is to buy land in Michigan. We are in a sweet spot, let me tell you, and more people are going to begin to recognize that as it gets hotter in the South, and there's more water problems, and there's this thing called the Great Lakes, right? If we can keep corporations from draining it, then we're going to be in a good position. So the good news is you're living in the best place I think you can be. What about courts? Can courts help us here? Well, I'm sure you all have paid attention to the news, and we have a president who's not really troubled by the fact that he doesn't have authority to do something. He just says he does and does it. And the only way to stop that is the courts. And we don't know yet exactly where the courts are going to end up with this. The Supreme Court's not had enough cases to us to say, to do any predictions. I have no idea what they're going to do this term. I'm not sure they do either. But the courts can be a buffer to our democracy that is very serious, a very good buffer. But we'll see. I mean, then the question is, if the court says he can't do it, will he stop doing it? A true authoritarian authority would say, what are you going to do? So what, court? Courts don't have a way of making somebody in the political realm do something. Also, there is an International Court of Justice, right? You might have heard of that. But understand it has a very limited capacity. It's a very scholarly place, a very thoughtful place, and it comes out with opinions that say what ought to happen under international law. But see, the word law is a misnomer, right? Because when we say law to non-lawyers, you think that there's something enforceable, right? If it's the law, enforce the law. There is nothing enforceable in international relations, right? It always runs back to what the sovereign really wants to do. And that's now, but the sovereign may want to do something because somebody else is doing something, because they want to look good, they want to share good things, they want to take a leadership position, they want to, there are positive things that may turn a government into trying to do it. Somebody may come with a big check and say, would you like to do this for us? And then, yeah, for a check. That's also been one of China's ways forward, except they sign contracts where they bring in Chinese construction crews to do big projects, airports, port facilities, under an agreement that says if they don't pay back, it's a loan. If you don't pay us back, then we take over control of that asset. And so Africa now has a real problem because China, I think, had to know they couldn't pay it back. And so this is a way to create spots of Chinese control within Africa. We don't have anything like that. Courts are not useful. There was an opinion that came down just 2 weeks ago from the International Court of Justice that affirmed that international environmental law does say that you have an obligation to keep it at 1.5 if at all possible, but no less than 2.0 centigrade. And this is a different step. Not only is that the law of the globe, but that if a country doesn't do that, then another country can sue. There's a couple of problems there. The International Court of Justice has jurisdiction over dispute only if both parties agree to the jurisdiction of the court. So if Guatemala wants to sue the United States for what it's doing to the country, the U.S. would have to agree to be part of that lawsuit. Countries do that, particularly when there's honest disputes between countries and they really need an outside arbitrator. That the International Court of Justice can be a very good outside arbitrator of disputes. But when a country doesn't want to be sued, they just don't agree to the jurisdiction. And again, the International Court of Justice has no court, has no police, has no jails, nothing and no ability to do economic sanctions. That would be some stick. And the World Trade Organization is an organization that has a stick of allowing money to become an outcome. If you've done something wrong under the trade rules, you can be stuck with a tariff by the one country, and you can't abrogate jurisdiction. If you're in, you're in. So there are ways of doing that. Do that, break that by giving it small. But this shows for the United States, CO2 emissions, and oil has been relatively steady for quite a while. Coal was way up there and it's come way down to here, and now he wants to turn that around. So we really had been almost at the end of the use of coal in the United States, except for the very special thing. And now natural gas is coming way back up. Well, that's what's happening here. Okay, I'm not going to stop yet, but that's my dogs. I have to show off my dogs. And actually, I've got 3 of them now, 3 Pyrenees. That's a little crazy. What's going to happen in the real world in the future? Well, I already talked about melting of glaciers. I was lucky enough some 20 years ago to go see a glacier in Alaska. And then somebody else recently went there and they said they had to walk an extra half mile now to get to the face of the glacier from where I was. And Glacier National Park, if you want to see glaciers, you better get there in the next decade because they're going to be gone too. It's happening everywhere. Notwithstanding the mouthpieces in DC, the world is warming up, and 1 degree does make a difference, and 2 is going to make it even worse. And is it, what's gonna turn it around? And I don't know what's gonna turn it around. One hopeful thing is that nuclear may come back into the vogue and provide us with a steady base of power. And I do think that's possible if we can get over the quote fear of nuclear, which is compensated for with the new engineering that does not allow anything to blow up. It's physically not possible to have these new plants blow up. It will not happen. They might stop producing, but they don't ever have an amount of uranium in the same place to blow up. Well, there is that, yeah. Well, we had one, and then the senator from that state blocked it. And it's, nobody, the scientists can find a place that supposedly is gonna be without any geological change for the next 50,000 years or something, and that wasn't good enough for that state. Although I must say, the fear of what happens in the movement of nuclear waste is something that might be real. But yeah, we don't. That's the least of my thing. And we also have a different form, of course, that's fusion power is now seriously being pursued. Some of our tech guys are willing to throw a few million towards this area of coming up with fusion, in which hydrogen is the fuel, no radioactive elements at all. And if they can break that fusion bond, and apparently it takes a lot of energy to break the bond, but when you do that, the release of energy is greater than the energy that went in. But it's at such a high level. They have, one place has like 100 lasers pointed at this little bitty atom like this big. And when all that energy hits it, then that's enough to trigger. It's the sun. We're trying to figure out how to make the sun in a small facility in the United States or elsewhere. But if they can do that, that's obviously an endless source of the fuel that is water. We got a lot of that. So if we can in the next 20 years do that, it will take away a lot of this. But again, you got the 100-year life expectancy. There's a point at which it doesn't make any difference if we put more in the air. Or the other place besides two other things that might happen. How am I doing time-wise? What time? Yell at me if I get too far. Coral reefs. They're already starting to go down because, and again, it's a small number thing. The ocean increases by 1 degree. That's enough to disrupt ecosystems that have existed for thousands of years. And the corals are apparently the canary in the coal mine, so to speak. They will go first, and they can't go anywhere. They're right here, and they just die because when it's absorbing CO2, it turns it into an acid. Okay, it doesn't stay as CO2, it becomes an acid, and that acid will eat away the coral that's in that place. And it depends on where it is about how vulnerable it is, but there are a number of reefs that have already bleached out and no longer are a functional ecosystem. That's sort of sad because that has impact on fisheries, obviously. The one that's more frightening in my mind is the warming of the Arctic. As that warms, then all of that land in Alaska, Canada, and Russia begins to unthaw. And as it unthaws, it releases methane. And ultimately, all of that land releasing methane can equivocate all the countries. There's just so much there, and there's no way to stop it. It's temperature dependent. And a couple of villages in Alaska have already lost and are about to lose their land because they can't operate anymore on this soft stuff. You can't get a truck or a car to drive through it. The other thing I thought was really interesting was normally the ocean freezes cold up there in the northern part of Alaska. And that is a buffer to any storms bringing in waves and causing erosion. Well, that's not freezing up like it used to do. So the waves are coming in and taking out land that otherwise had been protected over a long period of time. That's something we don't interact with, and I don't think most of us will ever go up and actually see a village where it's happening, but it's happening in a small number of people, but it's the methane. It's the bubbling. They have pictures of lakes up there and and it's just bubbling. And that's methane coming up from bio.
Why does thawing land put out methane?
Because that thawing land is almost all vegetation,
So it's the vegetation.
Just like coal.
Degrading.
Yep, this is the little bacteria eating the vegetation that's now at a temperature appropriate for them to eat it.
Oh, that releases methane.
Yeah. And it's over hundreds of thousands of acres, it's not a small thing. And those plants that are now unthawing were growing there the last cycle when the warmth was here and it was warm enough to grow plants. And then we went through a glacial period and now it's coming back to that warming period. By the way, that also impacts the animals up there. The polar bears are in serious trouble because where do they get their food? They get their food out of blowholes in the ice. When the seals come up, they grab the seals and eat them. And those blowholes aren't existing there because there's no ice.
And a question, I was actually, might have even been your very first slide,
Okay.
where you showed 400,000 years.
Right.
And you had it up and down with those low levels when there was a lot of ice and the big ice sheets were, and then more, in between the ice ages was when we'd have more.
More heat.
So it's up and down, and so that's the same
Well,
thing. because
there is a natural cycle.
There is that cycle and but if you don't stop that, it just continues to go up.
Yeah.
And we're not stopping it.
And
We're adding to it, but also from the plants and so forth there, where we are getting methane from those, that's also then adding to it.
Right. Okay. Any thoughts, questions? Access to, okay, yeah.
I've never heard it addressed how wars, or for example, all the bombs that were dropped on Gaza, how much CO2 does that put out? I mean, I know if there's fires, there's some.
I don't think CO2 is the problem.
CO2.
No, I don't
No.
think bombs cause a problem for CO2. I think it's the destruction is what causes the problem. And the destruction of the habitats for animals, the destruction of water systems, the destruction of all the other man-made things that are part of what's happening there. But to my knowledge, there may be some release for that, but the explosion is the damage the explosion does, not the CO2 from it.
Well, we know about all those damages. I just didn't know if there was another component.
It's relatively modest.
5 years ago, had an Earth Day program. I don't remember the title of it, but the subject was the pollution resulting from all the chemicals in the.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And well, the fuel that's used by,
Oh, yeah.
by the planes
Right.
and tanks and the
Oh, it's
armored vehicles,
They go 5 miles an hour. Right.
yeah, the Pentagon in Iraq and Afghanistan, I read somewhere, I mean, they polluted more than a small nation in Africa did.
I can believe that. Yeah.
I mean, totally, not, yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, and one of the things we don't think about a lot right now, we're in the midst of the UN is in the midst of a negotiation process for a plastic treaty. Why might we want to think about that? Besides litter, plastic is from petroleum.
Plastic is from petroleum.
Yeah. And so if you, the newsfeed, the New York Times climate column is extremly informative. If you get that as a update, they really do a good job of keeping you up to date and depressing you on a regular basis. But the plastics treaty, a lot of people, some pretty smart people said, you know what? We need to talk about the production of plastic because it's all fueled by petroleum. And so they got rolling, and the oil companies What do you think their stand would be?
No,
No,
No.
absolutely not. They were willing to talk about recycling of plastic, okay? Woo-hoo! Because that's not the problem is the production. However, they've been negotiating for almost a year, and at the last meeting, they had to quit with no agreement because the United States and Saudi Arabia and the other ones said production is off limits for the treaty. And the other parties said, that's why we're doing this. And so there's no agreement. And that's a problem in international law in the drafting of treaties is that you need consensus. Everybody needs to agree to the language before it's finally solidified. And so when you go to the treaty negotiation meetings, there's meetings everywhere because everybody has to come together. But there's 180 countries. And who do you think's at those meetings? And how do they operate, right? They're almost all bureaucrats. And what do they do with life? They go to meetings and negotiate. And what's important to them? Well, you would hope getting the end result, but I don't think it's always that. It's, you know, how well did I do here? How's my reputation? How did it come off? It's human nature again, and the people that are doing it. And I found out that another consequence of our new technology of total interconnectedness is that it used to be that international meetings were more like a company and a labor union negotiating. When they went into a room, they shut the door, and 12 hours they came out later. 12 hours later, they came out with an agreement. They beat each other down until they reached an agreement. Well, what happens in negotiations now is that the representative of Brazil is in the room negotiating, and they get to a particular point, and he's on his cell phone talking to his boss back in Brazil. So that it becomes impossible to engage in that human nature of being part of a negotiating group and understanding you've got to make an agreement with him. No, I'm going to talk to my boss back here, and I'm going to do whatever he says I got to do. And so the fact that you and I may be friends is irrelevant. So they should not allow cell phones in negotiating rooms, but they do. So that again makes it harder. And also, it used to be, frankly, that the economically developed countries sort of led the way internationally with treaty writing, but that's not the case anymore. There's 190 countries, and they all want to say something. If 190 countries all say something, that takes a day and a half just saying hello, right? So the capacity to reach a point of agreement is really hard. It can be done. I've seen it done when I attended some of the societies with a really good chairperson that is respected. You have to be respected or it doesn't work. In Copenhagen, I was one of the ones that it was a woman. It was terrible. She didn't know. She was clueless, and it totally froze the whole thing. In other places, I've seen a good chairman. He knows how to appoint people. He knows who to appoint to make things work. He wants compromise. You know, he's not pushing his agenda. He's a good chairman. Says, how do I get this group to agree to something? You know, who's important? What 5 people do I need to get in a room and have them agree? Because then their friends will all be more prone to accept that agreement. And it's a whole different world than Congress and our political system. You got more subtle, and if you're a lawyer, it's you see a lot of skill needs there. One final potential disaster if we don't do something, and again, I think Michigan comes out pretty well, and that is the Atlantic current. Again, we just don't know what it would take to make that happen. But if that current ever stops coming up the Atlantic coast and then going over to England, it's going to be the end for England, and Paris is going to now look like Ottawa in temperature and snow. And it would transform what you can grow. It can transform when you can do transportation. All sorts of bad things are going to happen.
I have heard of that being a potential tipping point. Is that due to the fresh water from the Arctic ice melting, or is it the temperature rise?
Well, it's both. It's Greenland freshwater. Think of Greenland. Ice bucket. And it's fresh water coming out of that and interfering. If you look at a global temperature chart for a month, you'll see that right off Greenland, it's different than anywhere else because of the cold water that's coming, and it's fresh water. And the fresh water is different density than the salt water. And so if you get enough of that coming off Greenland, then it can go down and there'll be an interruption in what's been an ongoing process.
Freshwater, here it goes. The Salt makes the other rise, so it's a circulation.
Right.
Another kind of rhetorical question. All of the authoritarians in the world who have their blinders on, what do they think their grandchildren and great grandchildren are going to do? Are they building a bubble?
They don't care. They don't care. They don't care about you. They don't care about me. They don't care about their grandchildren. They don't think like that. They are a different kind of human. Right? I mean, and unfortunately, the slick ones, it's like the old salesman selling something from the back of the wagon, right? I'm a slick talker, make promises I know I can't keep or don't care if I can keep. And whatever it takes to get the rabble, he doesn't really care about them, right? So they talk their way into a position, and then they implement the necessary procedures so that the people can't change that.
Is there, I don't know, you may not know, but I'm just wondering about if the weather from the Atlantic stream, if it changes the weather in Northern Europe, does that affect in other places as well eventually?
Oh, yeah, yes.
So it could eventually have an impact on us as well.
Yeah, it will have an impact because it's moving heat on a global basis. And there's 4 or 5 currents, not just the Atlantic current. And if and they meet down in Antarctica, that's another, I mean, it literally is a circle process.
And a big one.
Yeah.
Also.
And I don't think we know enough about what happens there. We just know it's not going to be good for Europe. And I think I've seen some changes for us, but not like Europe.
I'm wondering, Catherine, are there any questions you think from people online?
I asked them to unmute and ask or to post it here, so far nobody has. You can repeat it there if you want. You can just ask them.
Oh, any questions online? I think I scared him away.
There's nothing in the chat. There was one individual with plenty of commentary, but
Yeah, I wanted to sort of reiterate one of your earlier points, because I think it's important for us in Galuna and here. And that is the real impact of climate change on war. I mean, war does, cause, as we say, climate change, but war also has an impact. Is a reflective of climate change.
Oh,
And so that, and the continent that I know best and have worked in for 40-some years in Africa, it's clear there.
oh, yes.
That the wars that you're seeing across the Maghreb, the Sahel, and the Horn of Africa are not totally, but largely climate driven. And then also the point is, it's not just war, it impacts us directly because migrants in Europe is facing it now, for the last decade, and a lot of them are not just from war, refugees from war, but from areas that are completely dried out, that people.
Right, there's no economic act, they can't farm,
They
can't do anything.
So
they don't know. The young men,
migrate, yeah, and so it is an impact, ethically, morally, it's a problem for these people, obviously, but it also comes back and has an impact on us, we're thinking sort of in our best interest in what.
ecological migration is, there's a lot of people thinking about that. Nobody has any answers. Because under immigration treaty law, ecological change is not a reason for you allowing somebody in. That you can't it's not under the treaty as a reason you should let people in. And so they're thinking, do we have to change and modify the treaty to reflect this new need that's involved?
Yeah, just another plug, I guess, for doing the programs, is we did have one a few years ago about climate migrants. And there wasn't, the person who presented that day said there really wasn't much calendar at the time, it wasn't legally required.
Right, and nothing's changed. Another thing, be aware, is that it's really hard to change a treaty, to add language. It's just part of the human nature process again. Once it's there, it takes a lot to amend it because people just don't want to amend things. Just like I would, at this point, never suggest amending the US Constitution, bad idea. Because you don't know what's going to happen. So amendments to other treaties take a lot of consensus in advance and a lot of energy and getting together, et cetera, et cetera. So don't look to changing international law that way. Let me tell you, there are places where international treaties are still working, and in the animal area in particular, the International Whaling Convention is still doing a very good job of keeping whales alive. The International Treaty on Endangered Species, it's got some problems, but it's doing a good job of trying to control illegal trade of wildlife and illegal death and taking. There's treaties that deal with habitat protection that work as well. And most of those work because authoritarian figures don't really care about that. So what if Ivory comes or doesn't come in? They're not gonna.
They haven't
That's
figured out a monetary advantage for themselves. so
right, right.
Don't worry about it.
And it's not gonna hurt them. That whales don't vote.
Honest background for animals, because I was thinking, some things I heard, at least in North America, where they are trying to preserve and create and enhance corridors, so animals can move, as the. I
Yes.
just wondered if you had.
Well, they've wanted to have corridors to assure genetic diversity is one reason. You don't want 4 different genetic groups of an animal. It'd be much better for the long-term survival if they could interbreed among themselves. But yes, but it's really hard. I know that until the recent president, that within the Department of Interior, that it was a serious question. How do we put together things? But then there are other people that will see that and say it's the government taking over all of this is mostly out west, of course, and they're pretty independent minded out there, and government interference and all that sort of thing. But where they have had some successful corridors, they put in some corridors, and the animals seem to figure them out pretty well. Another very small version of that is providing bridges or underpasses for animals simply to get across interstates. So they're not isolated anymore. And if they every time they put them in, the animals have used it. So yeah, it's a really cool thing.
I don't recall the details of how it worked, but I saw something on PBS about someone talking about microorganisms. I don't know if they're evolving or if they're being genetically altered, but to somehow decrease CO2 emissions from I think from land, but I don't remember.
I think that's a joke. Do you know how many microorganisms are in one cubic yard of dirt? Millions and millions of them. I can't imagine trying to change that process. But microorganisms, well, you got different kinds. Some produce CO2, some sequester it. It depends on what you're talking about.
David, we want to thank you very, very, very much. We've kept
Good.
much longer than normally what we do is that we have someone talk a little bit about membership and we're trying to recruit new members. I don't see many. You're a member, so I don't know if we can do that. That's another thing. But to encourage people to attend more our events and to think seriously, and we do thank you very, very, very much.
Okay.
Thanks very much for doing the technology that none of us, well, I shouldn't say none of us, I don't know. Can I ask a question or a request? If people are physically able, can you pick up the chair that you are sitting on and put them over there on those? Because we need to clear this room. It was not
It was empty when we came in.
One-year interview that's done that has to do with climate change. At the very end, the interviewer always says.
Bye, Ron. Bye.